welcome back to those of you that are rejoining us. Welcome to those of you that are newly joining us, and welcome and thanks in particular to our friends and colleagues from a number of community projects, organisations based in and around Dublin Port, who are joining us on a Saturday morning, above and beyond the call of duty, quite frankly, but are here to tell us about a number of heritage projects. Heritage, again, very broadly conceived here: natural heritage, social heritage, built heritage, cultural heritage in and around Dublin Port, and who are here in particular to tell us about how you might, if you're not already, get involved in some of the work that these projects, groups and organizations are doing. And we're very, very grateful, as I say, to be joined by colleagues working in and around Dublin Port this morning. We're joined by Dean Eaton from the Dublin Bay Biosphere, Mary-Anne Harris from the Parks, Biodiversity and Landscape Services in Dublin City Council, Thomas Carolan from the Local Authority Waters Programme, La Joy from Dublin Port Company, Declan Byrne from the Dublin Dock Workers Preservation Society, and by Shannon Wilson and Nathan Mannion from EPIC, the Irish Emigration Museum, all of whom have been great friends to the project over its duration for several months, years at this stage. So I'll call on those speakers in turn, and as I say, they're going to talk about their work and in promoting and developing and so on heritage in and around Dublin Port, and with a particular focus on how you might, if you're not already, get involved in some of that work. And so, Dean Eaton, I'm very happy to hand over to you in the first instance. Dean from Dublin Bay Biosphere. Good morning, Dean.
Good morning, Jonathan. Thank you. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Brilliant. Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you. And thanks again for joining us this morning.
Oh, no, absolute pleasure. I'm going to share my screen in a second and get onto a presentation, but I just want to highlight the image behind me. This, for me, really captures the Dublin Bay Biosphere and what the Man in Biosphere program is all about. You've got in the foreground a seal, so it's nature. In the background, you've got a picture of St. Begnet's Church. So it's the cultural heritage. So we've got the natural heritage, the cultural heritage, and in the middle ground you've actually got some kayakers, and part of the biosphere is all about business sustainability and working with those businesses. So it's an interesting picture there that was taken by Nigel Motyer for an underwater photography competition that was run a couple of years ago. So anyway, let's get on. Let's share my screen. And can you see there a image of the River Liffey in Dublin Bay?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're good to go. So like, this is a fantastic image. There you have the lifeblood of Dublin, the River Liffey flowing out into Dublin Bay. A fantastic shot. The River Liffey flows through Dublin Port, and that image captures the whole of Dublin Bay. So from Ireland's Eye all the way around to Dalkey Island. Now, let's see. Let's hope I can get the images going. Yes, I can. Fantastic. So the second slide there shows you've got Ireland's Eye top left. You've got Howth there next to it, and just below Howth Head you've got North Bull Island. That's the original UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, and it's an unusual nature reserve in that it's man-made. You're aware of the history of William Blythe, and he was commissioned to look at how efforts could be made to desilt Dublin Bay because it was silting up, and as a result, the bow wall was built, and through Venturi action, the silt was removed, and the natural process is North Bull Island was formed. So it's a man-made nature reserve, which makes it quite unusual. So this next image again looks at North Bull Island out to Howth Head and Ireland's Eye in the background, but it's also looking at St Anne's Park, which was former home of the Guinnesses. and is part of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. And I'm going to cover a little bit about the extent of that shortly. So there you go, the original Biosphere Reserve, North Bell Island, and you've got St Anne's and the Royal Dublin golf courses. So obviously there's engagement with businesses, certainly sustainable businesses. Now you may have questions about water usage and chemical usage there, but we engage with all the businesses operating the bay. Sorry, hello.
I have to shut the door.
As you were, Dean. I think we're good to go.
Somebody's talking through there. I don't know what that was. Okay.
Dean, can I just use that opportunity just to ask you to expand your window so we can see your desktop behind, so we can see your presentation, just to make it a bit bigger.
Okay, is that better?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, apologies for that. So looking at the primary functions of a UNESCO biosphere, protecting the natural heritage is the primary point. So conservation work, education and research, and working with the businesses in and around those areas. That's the primary functions. A periodic view of the UNESCO Biosphere was conducted in 2014, and the original biosphere being quite small, being just North Bell Island, didn't quite fit with the new UNESCO biospheres. So it was proposed that we'd expand the biosphere and include the whole of Dublin Bay. So that covers an area of 305 kilometers, as you can see, and living within the biosphere, we have 330,000 plus residents, which is quite impressive. So this shows the maps of the biosphere, and you've got 3 areas of a biosphere. Now, ours is slightly unusual. Most biospheres have a kind of bullseye effect, but ours is a mosaic. So we've got a number of core zones, a number of core nature reserves, Natura 2000 sites, and surrounding them are the buffer zones. So in the core zones is where conservation takes place. In the buffer zones is where kind of education and community engagement takes place. And then you've got the transition zone, which is primarily for businesses and the like. So here we go. There's another slide here on biosphere reserves. UNESCO biospheres are places where we're trying to find creative and effective ways for people and nature to thrive together. And we want people to be connected with our biosphere. So, I mean, this is a great slide looking at some of the amazing diversity of wildlife that we have in our area. I mean, if you were to see this in any place, you'd want to go there and visit. And this is on our doorstep in Dublin Bay, and it's a fantastic resource to have. And it's on the doorsteps of Dublin Port, the busiest port in Ireland, and I think it's over 50% of the commerce coming into the country comes through Dublin Port, which is, it's great to have that connection, and that wildlife is able to thrive, and certainly that's a real positive. So we're looking at the governance. The biosphere is managed by 6 partner organisations. There they are on the right hand side: Fingal County Council, Dublin City Council, Dún Laoghaire County Council, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, Dublin Port Company, and Vulture Ireland. And through their collective resources and management, we're able to manage the Dublin Bay biosphere effectively. So there's another a great image of people taking advantage of the biosphere, and this has been really essential during the current climate with COVID. It's been a really important escape really from our own houses, and certainly people have been flocking to our biosphere and connecting with our biosphere. So a little image there of Dún Laoghaire Harbour, which was mentioned earlier, and then we've got Howth Harbour. And then we're looking into Dublin Port and the example of the ships that arrive on a regular basis into Dublin Port. But it's not all about commerce. I mean, Dublin Port have been fantastic with their research programs, and also their conservation. So here's Dublin Port tern colonies that have been created within Dublin Bay, and there's others. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, or mention a bit about the conservation work that takes place. And I've got a little video for you. that basically showcases some of the research that takes place. So.
You may just need to make sure that the sound is being shared as well, Dean. I'm not sure that we could hear that.
Okay, you're not okay.
Yeah.
In that case, if you can't hear that, I'm not sure I've got it set up to share the sound. So unfortunately,
it is okay.
It is.
I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear it, but worth another shot.
So if you unshare your screen, Dean, and then share it again, and there's a little tick box for sharing sound when you do that.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. This is one of those many TV problems.
One of the joys of this online existence we now all live, eh?
Oh my goodness.
So if you go back into Zoom and unshare.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back into Zoom.
Excellent. Okay.
Here we go. Here we go. It should be here. Okay. Apologies for this, everybody.
Okay.
I know why it is. I'm full screen here. Okay. Sharing. Here we go. Okay. So now if I share screen again, I will have the option to share sound. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're golden. Okay, my apologies. I'm sure it won't be the first.
Definitely not the last.
Okay.
These are Brent geese.
Oh, there's more coming in.
How many?
Like loads.
I'm going to keep it
At
minimized
least
if you don't
80
mind,
of
because I
them.
know
And
the picture
this
quality
is
might be
Tess
lost a little
Handby.
bit.
They're just doing that landing thing where they hover and then they stick their feet out and then they're coming in and they're turning around and they're landing. Yes.
A PhD student at the University of Exeter Penrose campus in Cornwall. Tess is working in collaboration with the Irish Brent Goose Research Group on a project aimed to quantify patterns of urban habitat use and the behaviour of Brent geese during the winter in Dublin Bay.
So there's definitely a family out there from this year.
Tess's research is part of the Dublin Bay Brent Geese Project, which is funded by 3 local authorities: Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, Dublin City Council and Fingal County Council. Each year, the parents and young birds complete one of the longest migrations undertaken by any waterfowl species from the high Arctic Canada. After a 5,000 kilometre journey crossing Iceland and Northern Ireland, they return to the salt marsh habitats within the Dublin Bay biosphere. The nearby estuaries provide a favourable food source by day and a place to roost at night. The Dublin Bay biosphere is a unique area that is internationally recognised for hosting many migratory species over the winter, while sitting alongside a densely urban landscape. North Bull Island was designated a UNESCO biosphere in 1981 and expanded to include the whole of Dublin Bay in 2015. The zone covers 300 kilometres squared, including the areas of ecological values and the communities where over 350,000 people live and work. Preserving the biosphere as a refuge for both resident and overwintering wildlife requires evidence-based sustainable management programmes, a key practice for all biospheres.
On 3, 2, 1, fire.
Catching birds to ring them and place GPS trackers on adults allows the team to record the number of urban sites the birds use and identify any effects or consequences from spending the winter in an urban landscape.
Have you got an adult, Drew?
Leave that one for now.
One here.
These two might be a pair.
1, 2, 3, 4. There's at least 4.
When they first arrive, the Brent geese feed on green seaweeds and other plants on the shoreline. They quickly run out of resources as plants have very little to no growth over the winter. Therefore, they gradually move from the intertidal and salt marsh area to feeding on coastal grasslands, sports pitches and other open spaces all around Dublin.
So once you'll take a bird out of the sack, it'll come to processing. We'll put Darvix on it then it will get morphs done, so head, bill, wing, weight. And then if it's a GPS bird, it will come to me and I'll put a GPS tag on it.
The research identifies the benefits and challenges of the biosphere. It also tries to better understand why the geese leave the specially protected areas to travel inland and graze on man-made infrastructures. The results will help the biodiversity officers provide informed advice and implement positive management practices. As human beings, we are part of the ecosystem and responsible for its ecological health. The challenges and benefits of Dublin Bay Biosphere are many. A scientific approach to the biosphere will help inspire a positive future by connecting people and nature.
Okay, hopefully everyone enjoyed that short video. So we're moving on with the presentation. We've got images there, again, of the obelisk on Killiney Hill, looking down towards Dalkey Island. And these images are shared by Fulch Ireland, and they're available for the businesses in the area to use to help promote the area, which are very important. So this next image shows the key towns along Dublin Bay that are connected with the biosphere. And what's interesting going forward is we're developing a partnership with Irish Rail, where we're going to be showcasing images of the biosphere in a number of railway stations around the bay, which will help raise the profile of the biosphere. I've got an image here of Dublin Bay Cruises, so operating out of Dún Laoghaire and Dublin Port and out of Howth. Visitors can take a cruise around Dublin Bay and learn about the biosphere, its natural and cultural heritage. Other events that take place within the bay, we've got Dublin Kite Festival, which is a key event on the calendar when permissible to do so. And then we've got images here of some of the activities where we've engaged with young people. So this is Birdwatch Ireland. This is Ricky from Birdwatch Ireland taking a group of young people out to study and learn a little bit about the wildlife within our bay. These young people were responsible for creating a fantastic video that highlighted the importance of Dublin Bay for young people and their interest for connecting with nature. And then we have Brent Geese ambassadors. So these are school children that have learnt about our Brent geese and are interested in helping to protect this important species. Going forward, we've developed a number of projects more recently. So we've got a number of social influencers that write articles for our e-zine, and I'll share the link for our e-zine later. But one of our social influencers has taken an interest in the people of Dublin Bay, humans of the biosphere, and writing a little bit about their story. But we've other social influencers that are helping to connect with a wider audience, and these are volunteers. There's a Dublin Bay Biosphere Award badge. We're working in partnership with Scouting Ireland to develop an award for young people to immerse themselves in our biosphere, learn a little bit about the processes that go on and the interactions between human and nature, and then identify a way in which they can help protect our biosphere. And in doing so, they will earn a Dublin Bay Biosphere Award. Now, the interesting thing is, obviously it's been developed in partnership with Scouting Ireland, but this is an award that's available to any young person. So if you're in a school connected to the biosphere, if you're part of a sports club or a community group, all of these people can work towards getting the badge. And okay, the badge isn't going to go on a uniform, but it will sit nicely on a school bag or the like. We've developed a number of videos that help promote the location, and these are used to attract visitors to the bay. And I'm just going to show you a very short video on kayaking. All things being equal. So that's one of a series of videos that promote the Bay, and all of these are available on our website, and I'll share the link for that later. Another event that we've been organising is a Try Biosphere webinar series. This is in partnership with neighbouring biospheres in the Isle of Man and Kerry, in which we share the beauty of our various biospheres and tell interesting stories about it. So the first we hosted with Birdwatch Ireland, and the next is going to be taking place next month, and that's going to be involving the Irish Whaling Dolphin Group. Details are on our social media channels. As a result of the Try Biosphere webinar series, we were contacted by a young person who said they really enjoyed the webinar and wanted to have something maybe aimed at more young people. So we hosted a homeschool webinar series, the last of which was run yesterday, and these proved extremely popular. We had 500 signups for each of the webinars, and huge interest from not just individuals, but schools around the country. And just a few more images of some of the wildlife that you may encounter. Now, a little bit about historical use of Northwell Island. It was at one point used, unfortunately, as a landfill site, and was treated pretty poorly. I think it was a firing range at one point during World War I. But thankfully, the site is protected, and that was through community actions to help get the biosphere status. Now, going forward, we've plans for a visitor centre on Northwell Island that will help tell our story a little bit better. That's the proposed location. And I know that a lot of research went into finding out how best to offer a visitor centre. And this was one of the early drawings of what that visitor centre might look like, and some of the content that we'd have in it. Now, I know this site, I believe, has been scaled back, but hopefully it will be a fantastic resource if it comes to fruition for the public to learn about and connect with our biosphere. And the final slide is another image of Dublin Bay and Northwell Island. And I hope that was informative and interesting to you.
Thank you so much, Dean. So many cool ways of engaging with the natural heritage of Dublin Bay, and I, for one, cannot wait to get on the water and go kayaking as soon as it is humanly possible to do so. That looked amazing, and I love the picture of the seal behind you as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you again for joining us this morning. If you'd like to put contact details, social media and so on in the chat, that would be brilliant, so that people know how to reach out.
I did that.
Yeah,
thanks, John. And I'll hang around if there's any questions at the end as well. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. So Marianne Harris, I don't know if you're here under an assumed name or identity, but if not, Thomas Carolan from the local authorities the local authority waters program. I know that you are here, and be very happy for you to introduce yourself and the program and so on. So Thomas,
hi Jonathan, do you want me to start away then if there's no Marianne?
Go ahead. Yes, thank you very much.
One moment to share.
Just while you're getting set up, Thomas, I should have flagged this at the beginning, totally forgot to do so, but it's best for you to engage with the session if you're not doing so already in speaker view. That will automatically bring up the person presenting. And the other thing I just want to flag before Thomas starts is that we are asking attendees today to fill out at the end of the session a short feedback form. I'll post the link in the chat now, and we'll flag it again at the end, but it would be very helpful to us as a project if you would fill out. It shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes, and it would be very helpful to us as a project if you would do so. But I'll flag that again at the end, but I'm putting it in the chat now. And sorry to interrupt there, Thomas, over to you now.
No problem, John, thanks very much. So I'll start by giving a very brief overview. I'll try not to be boring, but just to put in context who LawPro are, who I work for, and what we do. LawPro, or the Local Authority Waters Programme, were set up as a specific agency to tackle issues around water quality in Ireland in 2016. There is a community side, of which I'm part of. I'm called a community water officer, and there's a catchment science side. The catchment scientists are out trying to identify particular pressures, as we call them, the issues affecting water quality around the country. My job is to work with community groups that work on water bodies, rivers, canals, lakes, etc. And some groups are already engaged with those waterways, but we try and encourage them to engage further and undertake projects to protect and enhance those water bodies. Brief background, the reason we were set up is because Ireland was not meeting its requirements under what's called the Water Framework Directive. And as part of that, not just for ourselves, but for the UK too, the aim is to reach good water quality by 2027. Unfortunately, that will have to be put forward, that aim, because it won't be achieved. You see here the chart for waters from high to bad. If we go on to the next map, we can see the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's most recent report from 2013, 2018, and you see every river in Ireland there is assigned, and you see that the greens are good, literally they are good status, and the blues are high status water bodies, and the yellows and browns are poor and moderate, and red is bad. So I won't go into the details of that because I know that's not what we're talking about today, but that's a background. If I zoom into Dublin City, we see the rivers highlighted in blue here converging on the port area, Dublin Bay. And if I click on the red dots, these are community groups. You'll see them located along these waterways. This is not all of them by any stretch of the imagination. I just thought I'd give you an idea. But these groups are active, working on these waterways in order to try and, as I said, protect or enhance them in some sort of way. But my question today is, for this discussion about the port, apart from the groups we see on the East Coast, Ringsend, Irishtown, Sandymount, and these other groups, do they have a link with the port? Does the port have resonance for them if they aren't essentially on the doorstep of the port? And I know you could argue that they're very close, a couple of kilometers, but we'll just say for this discussion, if they're not in the immediate vicinity or they can't see the port, are they connected? I would argue that there's a really strong connection with the heritage of the port from the work and the projects I see the groups do on the ground, but also by the very nature, the very fact, the connection of these waterways. It seems very simplistic, but even from just an ecological point of view for wildlife, if you think of in terms of any angler will understand the importance of upstream, downstream, and the health of a river. So this alone makes the connection. And if we move forward, we see what's known as the Liffey or Dublin Bay catchment. Now there's 46 catchments, water catchments in Ireland, and you see the big blue line is the Liffey itself. The other rivers are tributaries, and all these rivers converging and flowing into Dublin Bay. So you see the idea of the connection, the catchment scale connection. And in our work in the Local Authority Waters Programme, we talk about this. We promote the idea of catchment scale, thinking in catchment wide scale for rivers groups. And the reason is because we all interact with water bodies, often unbeknownst to ourselves, and it's from the source or headwaters, you know, and in terms of people's work, recreational activities, and numerous ways from the top of the beginning of a water body until it flows into the sea, and that may be at a port area similar to the Liffey. If I go on to the next slide, it gives an idea of the work that groups do, and you ask the question, you know, what do groups actually do to protect and enhance these water bodies? They do numerous things. There's regular cleanups, of course, but they do what's called river restoration. They plant trees, they use natural measures to try and prevent flooding. They commission reports, and they do lots of projects on the heritage of these rivers. But what's behind all of these, behind these actions, is at the beginning an interest. something that has piqued the interest in a group, the ecology, the stories, the nature, something about that river. And I suppose, to paraphrase an often used line that is attributed to different people, people protect what they care about. And I see this all the time with river groups. And the beginning of that is, as I said, that story and that understanding of the heritage, be it natural, cultural, social. And that begins with the idea of the history, the past, the people that work in and around a river and water body. And I think what it shows is that that history and that story and the heritages we're talking about today is intertwined with the actions that are taken to protect a water body. Now, this slide I borrowed from Dublinia. It's a really good resource. It looks at pre-Viking settlement Dublin. And we see we're looking here at the area around Christchurch and what was the Wood Quay site. And what we see here is the Poddle River coming to the south. And most people here, I'd imagine, will know that this pool here, the Poddle Pool, is where Dublin gets its name, the Black Pool, Dublin for Dublin. And this was a suitable, protected site where Vikings could land their ships. So it's arguably the first port in Dublin City. So, you know, this again, if I pose the question, which I did, how can the groups that are a bit more inland from the port, from the immediate vicinity of the port, how can the idea of the port have resonance for them? How can they connect to it? Numerous ways is my argument, because these water bodies, as I said, are physically linked, but the cultural heritage and the stories and the history and the past are so intertwined. So we start with that image of the Black Pool that's so significant to the beginning and the settlement of Dublin. And we go to the next image, also from Dublinia, their map where you can look at different phases of life in Dublin. And you see this is Norman settlement here, 1190. But what you notice is that this area around the Poddle has been diverted. You see the Liffey, a lot of land has been reclaimed. And it's interesting how Dean referred to Bull Island as being man-made. But the reality is that most rivers and water bodies are managed. They all are managed, really, in fairness. The idea of wilderness in inverted commas is very hard to come by. And you see the Poddle at this early stage was being diverted. And now in the city centre, the River Poddle is mostly underground, one of many hidden rivers, culverted. It actually runs right underneath where I'm talking from now in Dublin 8, underneath the house that I live in. So some groups are, to a greater or lesser extent, really strongly aware of this connection to the waterways that essentially converge on Dublin Bay and have that connection to the port. So another question, I know it was said, which is great throughout this, that for this project, that the idea of heritage has been looked at broadly, which is very important. But you pose the question, what constitutes water heritage, which is the title of my particular talk. You know, you say water bodies and waterways themselves, the rivers, the lakes, natural heritage, flora, fauna, boats, industrial buildings, something that we really can say, yes, that's heritage or infrastructure, or water-related jobs. We think of dock workers, recreational activities, you know, angling. These things are part of the fabric of what we'll say is the water heritage. For example, I'll show you this slide. During Heritage Week in Ireland in August, the final Sunday, the last day, the last few years, we have an arrangement with the Heritage Council that it's designated as Water Heritage Day. This is an event we ran in Stoneybatter in the city centre, where Roy O'Donnell here from Dublin City Council was giving a talk about the 55,000 gullies that have to be managed. Doesn't seem like an exotic topic, and people are finding it very interesting. You know, this has more importance for some areas of the city that might be prone to flooding, but the talk went down very well, and they discussed the idea of pipework in the city. And one man turned to me and said, I really enjoyed the talk, but it's a bit tenuous to link with heritage, water heritage. I thought it was interesting because what it indicated was, you know, I think a lack of understanding of the idea of heritage. So if you don't mind me making the reference, I think nobody would have an issue recognizing the importance of Roman aqueducts, for example. Now, I know you might gasp at the idea of connecting pipes and underground infrastructure in Ireland to a Roman aqueduct, but it is ours, and it is part of the fabric of the city, and has a direct link to the Liffey. And as is again the theme of my talk, all of these converge and go to the same area, the same spot. And this is part of my work, working with groups to try and emphasize the fact that waterways are linked. And some people are a lot more aware of this than others. So for my last couple of slides, I just want to give people something that's, a bit more clearly examples of heritage, water heritage, as I deal with groups. So last year, around this time, the beginning of lockdown, we felt that our work was going to be restricted with groups because we're often on the ground. So we launched a competition called Stories from the Waterside. It ended up being very, very popular and successful, and we had hundreds of stories from all over the country talking about their stories. It was an initiative from ourselves to try and engage with groups when we felt we weren't going to be able to do our usual work. It resulted in a publication, Stories from the Waterside, and you'll see there on World Wetlands Day in February, we had a live reading from the winners of this competition. But what came out of it, I thought was fascinating and really emphasizes the point I'm making today about, does it have to be the people in the immediate vicinity of the port who can feel connected to that heritage? But what came through from our competition, Stories from the Waterside, and the publication was how many people wrote stories about rivers and water bodies that they grew up beside. So we're talking about distance in memory and time and distance. It was amazing the amount of stories that people who hadn't been beside the little stream in their back garden for 50 years and spoke about it. So this connection with water is very strong. So this is, I suppose, the thesis of what I'm saying today, that not only are rivers connected physically, but people do feel that connection even if they're at a bit of a distance. I want to give some practical examples from groups I work with. The Puddle, as you see, I mentioned that. This is a group that I work with and support. They're based in Crumlin, funny enough, so it's another branch of the Puddle to where I am right now. But they started a project last year, and we're funding the second part of this year. Very unique, I think, where they're looking at any previous archived records of where the river was mentioned, and it's absolutely fascinating. So before going into the environmental sector, I have a background in history and archaeology, and I find this project really fascinating. The stories, unique, informative of where this river was mentioned. You know, everything from a house falling into the river because it was underground, and that can seem tragic, but they're very unique little anecdotes about the river, and a really fascinating project. So again, coming back to my idea that in order for people to be sometimes activated into doing, we'll say, the inverted commas practical work of protecting and enhancing a river, there has to be that interest, and these sort of heritage projects really promote that and spread that interest. Another project here is from a group called Friends of the Camac, who work on the Camac River in Clondalkin that flows into the Liffey at Houston Station. We support them again financially with funding to create this booklet, which I would highly recommend, and it's called Camac Connections. Again, that idea of connections. They are really active on the river, but this booklet looks at the past, the flora, the fauna, the industrial heritage, where the Camac is based in their area in Clondalkin. There was a gunpowder mill, there was a flour mill, a paper mill, and numerous stories. And again, this group has a wealth of knowledge in its members in terms of wildlife and cultural and angling heritage and knowledge. But the idea of this booklet is really was something that they really desired and wanted in order to let the rest of the community know about their river. Finally, I just wanted to use this image. This isn't related to Dublin. This is related to my own passion and hobby, which is something called a Boyne Currach. I thought it was relevant because coracles, as they're called in Wales, are skin boats. I know there's a very strong culture of them too. And this is a boat I made a few years ago, a Boyne Curragh, from where I come from in Meath, and it has been associated with the River Boyne and catching salmon for as long back as people can remember. And the photo in the background is of one of the last known makers who only stopped making them in 1930 around. But I think the power of the Boyne Curragh is that how this one object can embody the heritage of a river, the work involved in the river, its people, the craft, the salmon itself, and equally the fact it's made with materials on the banks, the hazel for the frame, the cowhide. This one object has such a powerful resonance for the heritage of one particular river, the very name of it, the Boyne Curragh. And it goes back to, it's interesting, I was just getting, was it Marianne at the start who was talking, yes, talked about the Broiter boat and the project being done by Margaret Pendrell. And I think that, you know, it just shows how one object can embody the idea of what we're talking about and heritage. So I just wanted to finish on that. I know that seems off point when we're talking about Dublin Port. I'm going to finish, it's my last slide, but again, to reiterate my point in the work I do with community groups working on rivers and water bodies, that I feel that connection with the port, even if they're not in the immediate vicinity, is extremely strong. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you in particular for including your contact details. And if I could ask if you could also put them into the chat for us, so that anyone who might like to get in touch to talk more
problem,
about
I'll do that, Jonathan. Yeah,
water heritage in and beyond Dublin Port with yourself, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
no problem.
Thank you so much. And moving swiftly on, I'm going to ask Lar Joy, who is Port Heritage Director at Dublin Port, to talk us through some of his work, and again, some of the ways that you may wish to engage with that work if you're not already doing so. So, Lar, are you?
I'm here, Jonathan. Can you hear me perfectly okay?
We can hear you perfectly. Thank
Okay.
you so much.
I'm now going to try and see if I can get my PowerPoint up, and we'll see what happens. Okay. Fingers crossed. Can you see that?
It's yes, I can see that.
Okay, and it's in presenter mode now.
Not yet.
There we are. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you, Lar.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for inviting me here today, and thanks to the other two lecturers that were fascinating. I learned a huge amount. My name is Lar Joy. I work at Dublin Port. I'm the Port Heritage Director, and I've been there for about 3 years. And I look after the heritage element, and then also in particular our wonderful port archive, which I'll talk about. To kind of give you a crash course on the history of the port, and don't worry, I'm not going to go too much on it, but just this kind of gives you an idea of how long Dublin Port has been around, and Dublin Port Company itself has been around since 1997. It's a modern company, it's a semi-state, and then it's also described as a landlord port. So it's responsible for the physical infrastructure for the pilot boats, for the harbour master, security, and things like that, and not for the operations of unloading and of the ships, which some other ports do. This map here, it kind of gives you an idea of that kind of 300-year history and the impact it's had on the city. In many ways, the river and the high tides went up as far as Trinity College in 1707. You can see why North Strand is called North Strand, because it was the furthest reaches of the city at the time. And the city has been moving eastwards since about 1720, being filled in from the kind of 1750s, the quay walls being built by the company, and responsibility for all the bridges was held by the company up to the 1970s and then passed to Dublin Corporation. So you can see that the port itself has had a huge impact on the physical structure of the city, particularly in relation to East Wall, Grand Canal Docks, South Lots, North Lots, and those kind of areas which are kind of heavily residential. So it's a long and fascinating story. This map here in 1909 just kind of gives you a better idea of what it looked like at its peak, if you like, in particular in the area that we call the Docklands now, which is full of finance companies and software companies. But at the time, it was very much a centre point. All trains came into Dublin, came into the port. It was the hub of importing and exporting. And this is what it looks like today. This is the area that's being kind of modernised. And then the port itself has moved eastwards past the East Wall, or the East Link Bridge. In many ways, it's been forgotten about. People don't see it, in particular since the port tunnel has been built. The impact of trucks on city traffic has kind of disappeared. So we're kind of out of sight and out of mind. It's something that the port is very, very aware of. And this is the side of the port that most people don't see. Maybe if you're on the south wall, you can see parts of it, but this is the kind of the hub. You can see it's very much based on the north side of the city. It's still reliant on the south wall and the north wall to keep the port open. As Thomas was talking about the importance of the river. The river Liffey comes down from the Wicklow Mountains, flushes out into the bay, and because it's channeled between those two walls, that gives us a natural channel, and also make sure that we don't get a buildup of the big sandbars, or the bulls as they're called, which dominated the city until about 1825. Sand was always silting up the city. Today, these are the Ro-Ro companies that are use the port daily, and you see them coming in and out. We also have 3 competing Lo-Lo terminals. So Ro-Ro, Lo-Lo are the kind of 2 buzzwords that port people use. And then more recently, we're starting to see more containers going on Ro-Ro with CLDN, which is a very big international company from Luxembourg, who do 6 trips a week to Zeebrugge and Rotterdam. And these are some of the biggest ships in the world. These are unaccompanied containers and trucks. So my background is in archives and museums. I've been a curator and archivist, and the kind of hub of what I'm doing at the moment is our archive collection. And this is kind of just gives you an idea of what we have. Having 78,000 photographs in one company's collection, I think is highly, very important, and 30,000 engineering drawings. So we can actually document visually what I've been talking about, that expansion of the city from about 1800, the maps, and then from 1861, 18 later on, the photographs. So it's an amazing collection. We're having a great fun at it. Myself, my colleague Marta are heavily working on that at the moment. Ports traditionally kind of commissioned paintings. This is Halpin's Point, the area where the Point Theatre or the Three Arena is now. And this is what it would have looked like around 1840. It's where the beginning of the steamships were going to England, where you can see steamships on the right hand side, and then of course the very busy fishing area that this was on the south side and the north side at the time. The Custom House itself really was the big move. Once that is built, that sees the safety and the speed of the shift eastwards to speed up. And these are recent photographs that we just recently scanned from the 1950s, which kind of follow on from Dean's wonderful photograph of that view of the city looking eastwards. This is what the city looked like, and in particular the port area in the 1950s. And you can see it's a heavily industrial area. This is the area again around the Three Arena, looking southwards over the Grand Canal. You can see Alexander in the bottom part of the photograph. And then this is looking northwards where the convention centre is today, along the Royal Canal. And this area again would have been full of goods yards, which have now disappeared and been replaced by modern buildings. Looking into the Grand Canal Basin, you can kind of see again a heavily industrial area. You would have had the Dublin Gas Company, you would have had the Tram Company was based there, and a series of other smaller businesses. And this is my favorite photograph, is of the graving docks that are there still in the Grand Canal. Graving docks 1, 2, and 3, which would have built a lot of the boats for the canals. And then distance, you can see Ringsend, and you can see very much shipbuilding and ship repair is very, very big in that area in the 1950s, kind of ends around the 1970s. The engineers, and these photographs are taken from the engineers, also photographed the kind of physical structure of the port. These are samples of the cranes that were in use. In the last survey I've come across of cranes, there were roughly 69 cranes in operation in the port in 1979. So those cranes have all disappeared, all been scrapped. We've been lucky enough to maintain 3 heritage cranes, but that was really what dominated the quays right up into the early 90s. And these are just some samples of the historical ones from the 50s. And this is just a curiosity photograph. Again, a lot of ports have their own railway engines to move goods around the port. In Dublin Port, these are tractors that were used to pull the trains. On the left-hand side, you can see a new train arriving for CIE being brought across what is now the roundabout at Three Arena. And then further back, you can see some older carriages being brought along by tractor. So again, we've a vast collection of these, which I just find fascinating. More recently, Marta and myself have worked on a big collection of a scanning project of 4,500 of the oldest engineering drawings, which cover not just the physical structure, but also things like the steam launch Erin. Here you have a proposed customs office. These were built all in the 1920s because, of course, suddenly we became an independent state and customs infrastructure had to be built. Something similar, of course, has happened recently with Brexit. This is Barrack Bridge, which is that blue bridge that you see up beside Collins Barracks, where the National Museum is, just before you get to Euston Station. That's a kind of preliminary drawing. North Bull Lighthouse, again, the port is responsible for 3 lighthouses. And these were all built by the port engineers and port staff. And again, here's a proposal by Binda Bloodstoney, again, about expanding, moving eastwards. Again, lots of proposals, lots of ideas. So we have all those kind of planning documents, if you like, but this one was actually never actually implemented. So you find all this material, and Marta, myself, and our team in the IT and social media team are starting to upload newer, more interesting collections like that onto the website. We're also hosting regular talks and lectures, which are slowly transferring onto Zoom. And then physically, we've been working with recent projects. So in particular, you have the Diving Bell project, which was opened in 2015. The Diving Bell had been on Sarajan Ski for many years, and it was lifted up and then a museum inserted underneath. And that was done by my colleague, Jim Kelleher, who also redeveloped the area around Port Centre, creating a maritime garden, but also reinstating one of our heritage cranes that you can see there on the left-hand side. In 2019, the Liffey Ferry was reintroduced onto the water. This Liffey Ferry number 11 was one of the last ones. That service stopped in the 1980s once the Eastlink Bridge was built. And before COVID impacted on us, it was running daily to the quickest way to get from the Three Arena across over to Sarajan Ski without a very long walk through the Samuel Beckett. This is an image by our team at Grafton, who were working with Grafton Architects, the internationally highly awarded architects. And this kind of gives you an idea of some of the projects that we're developing over the next couple of years in relation to heritage and culture. And I'll kind of go through these. We're developing a greenway from the Liffey to the Talca, and also creating a Talca Estuary Greenway, which will go the whole way out to the end of the port. So again, ports are very, very busy places, a lot of trucks. I cycle in the area myself. It's an interesting experience. So we're quite keen to get cyclists and pedestrians protected, and in particular with greenways, to kind of see the city and the port and the bay in a different way. And then we're also developing a pump house heritage area, which I'll talk about, and also a flour mill, the old Odlums area, into a cultural quarter. Darmody Architects are preparing this project. Pump House and Graving Docks heritage area is the old area where the shipbuilding used to take place on ship repair. This is kind of preliminary to the second stage. This is opening this year, and then in the next couple of years we'll be opening up Graving Dock 1, which is the oldest graving dock in Ireland, which was filled in about 20 years ago. So that will become an area that will look at shipbuilding, at the kind of the role of ships and the heritage of that shipbuilding. The substation, for those of you who know the area, was an ESB. Prior to that, DCC substation on the corner of Alexander Road and East Wall Road. Has a preservation order on it, so we're working with Tim Darmody and his team again to create it as an area for visitors to come in. It's the kind of dividing line between the city and the port. We're keen to kind of people go in there to kind of see the history of the port, and then be encouraged to make their way down to the other parts, and also, if possible, to take a bicycle and cycle around the area. This just shows you the extent of the Greenway project. You can kind of see it's 4.2 kilometers the whole way down along the northern edge of the port, with views over to Clontarf. The area at the moment has a lot of trees on them, and we're keeping those trees, and the route is kind of going around those trees, and then to give people a kind of a good run or cycle out to what will be a linear park. And again, this park will now give you a different view of the city, but also particularly of the bay. And of course, for years, from 1972 to 2010, the port had been keen to expand and keep moving eastwards, but Board Planola decision in 2010 stopped that. So again, with the biosphere, with the reality of the huge amount of nature that and the huge population of birds around us, we're now working with various organizations to protect that. And this is an area that will allow us to kind of show off that also. And this then, again, working with Grafton Architects just kind of gives you an idea of the connectivity. We're keen for people to kind of do heritage trails through the Docklands area, see where the port was up to the 1989, and then to come down into the modern ports and come along the Liffey Talca Greenway to then go out the whole way out. So connectivity for this project, for these projects is very, very much needed. And then the final project then is the Flour Mill project, which we're working with Grafton Architects. And this is to convert and to create a safe way of getting out to the Odlum site. And within the Flour Mill area, we'll have theatres, we'll have cultural areas, we'll also have shops and restaurants. There'll be a large hall to kind of, again, look at the port history, look at the kind of the working boats that are associated with the port. And also from my point of view, then it's kind of essential to create an archive and reading room so that we can show off our collections to researchers, not just on the website, but also to kind of get people in to do family history, but also to look at the economic history of Ireland. More recently in October, we ran a series of online theatre shows from the Pump House. We were lucky during the drop in levels during the summer to get in there to the Pump House to film 5 plays with Access Ballymun, but also with New Productions and Fish Amble Theatre Company. And 2 of those shows have been nominated for Business to Arts Awards. So we're looking forward to hearing the results of those next month. So busy for us down in the port at the moment. Hopefully you're able to see that and to hear me perfectly okay. I'd like to thank my colleagues. They're my contact details. Please don't hesitate to contact me, and please do check the Dublin Port Archive, and we'll be updating that throughout April. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Lar. And again, my ask to you is the same as to the others who presented today. If you'd be happy to put your contact details into the chat as well, that would be brilliant.
Will do.
Thank you.
Of course. No worries.
And thanks very much. And we're delighted now to be joined by Declan Byrne from the Dublin Dock Workers Preservation Society, who likewise will tell us a bit about the society, its work, and how you might engage with or otherwise become involved or seek to become involved in that work. So Declan, are you there?
That's it, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you grand. Yes, great to see you.
So,
thank you.
As a techie dinosaur, I don't have any pictures or slides, but I'm famous for talking too much. So I'm going to try and tell 3 stories about the industrial history of the docks. We were set up over 10 years ago to try and capture because the communities in the Docklands, Ringsend, Pearse Street, City Quay, North Wall and East Wall, they depended on their survival for working the docks. And with modernisation over the years, that has changed. But I found some of the stuff I would have known before I got involved in this amateur group, and some of the stuff, some of the stories have emerged since. One of the ones that I found fascinating, in Irish history books during the Civil War, it stated that the railway workers were the first to black the munitions coming in for the British Army. So lo and behold, some research was done by An Post, and in September last year, they brought out a stamp called Dockers Down Tools, where they identified that in May 1920, outside the North Wall extension, on the North Wall, a particular docker called Michael Donnelly asked his fellow workers, I'd imagine the ship had 4 or 5 hatches, and one hatch was full of equipment for the British Army. And the reason why it would have berthed there was because there was a rail link both in the North Wall extension and the North Wall, into the Point Depot, which is now the Tree Arena. So the cargo could be loaded directly onto carriages and transported over there. So Michael Donnelly, who's a shop steward with the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, the official story is he went up to Liberty Hall and the executive were in a meeting and they couldn't tell him what to do. I think it was a Friday and they'd gone home early. So Michael Donnelly went back and he asked his fellow dockers not to handle the cargo. And I believe that was the first of the gesture. And I totally believe that the rail workers in the Point Depot and then the rail workers throughout Ireland followed the example. But it's a terrible pity that An Post didn't name Michael Donnelly. In Anne Matthew Halligan's book, it names him as a member of the Irish Citizens Army that fought in 1916. And there's a few other academic references to him post the Rising. But he was from East Wall, and then his son, who's also Michael Donnelly, was the first docker to become president of the Marine Port and General Workers Union. So I'm going to take this on a little walk and tour. We're now going, that was the outside the Point Depot, and we're now going down as far as the Convention Centre and the bridge across the Liffey. So in 2013, the port company joined with SIPTU, and they got it in a story in Porty Gates to look at the role of the Dublin dockers in the 1913 lockout. And again, I found this fascinating in that the Dublin dockers and the Dublin dock workers were all recognised, their unions were recognised. So initially they increased their union dues to make a subscription to the people who are locked out. And then Jim Larkin made around 4 speeches saying he was going to pull the workers out because at that stage, if Dublin Port stopped working, it really affected the Irish economy. But that didn't happen. But when Larkin, I believe, was in Liverpool fundraising, James Connolly then brought the dockers out in a sympathy strike. And through the work that Porty Gates did, they were able to find employers' ledgers where there was marks against people's names. So in each and every case, and you're talking about 1,000 workers, the mark meant that they took part in this strike. And the result was that they never worked in the port again. Likewise, the East Wall History Group did work because some employers in the port, to attract you to work there, gave you houses on Merchants Road in East Wall. And workers who took part in the strike were evicted. And to attract what's commonly known as scabs, they were given, the scabs were given their houses. So here you had, in 1913, 1,000 families in the Dockland communities in dire poverty. And combined with the fact that in a World War situation, the trade in the port massively declined. So dockers who were chasing the work, who weren't permanent, who were dependent on the throughput, they found themselves in dire straits. So the amount of people from those communities and the amount of people involved in the 1913 lockout and the amount of dockers that joined the British Army in the First World War was truly staggering. But I didn't realise, and it took people like Paddy Daly and Pat Bean, who were involved with our group, to tell us that the same tradition existed in the Second World War. a high proportion of Dublin dockers joined the British Army, even though some would consider that treachery. And then the most famous case is Patrick Fatser Curry, who I had the pleasure of working with, and he joined the British Army in 1940, and in 1942, in the island of Malaya in Singapore, the British forces outnumbered the Japanese forces, but the Japanese forces totally overrun them. And on the 15th of February, he was arrested by the Japanese forces. And his documentation shows that he was from 13 Nixon Street, North Wall. And on his arrest records showed him as a dock labourer. So he did over 2 years in a prisoner of war camp in Japan, and at one stage working on the Burma Railway. In his records, it's shown that he was beaten and had broken bones. And there's also records of him being stabbed by not obeying his captor's orders. He returned to North Wall and he returned to being a docker. And then I worked with him. We won't go into why he was called Fatser, that's for another day. But Japanese ships in the port of Dublin were very unusual. And his family asked me to check on this story. And because it was such a famous story, I didn't have to check. The Japanese ship came into port. Fatser went to the gangway and told the crew he wanted to speak to the captain. And the crew member led him up to the control room. And lucky enough, there was 5 or 6 other crew there. And Fatser said, nothing personal to the captain, but I need to kill you. So a fight broke out. The crew carried Fatser to the far side of the ship and they threw him into the Liffey. So luckily enough, where the ship was berthed, there was a ladder that he was able to come back, and he presented himself again at the ship. So the captain called the police. The police arrived. They would have known Fatser on first name terms for other reasons. The captain didn't want to press any charges, which was his right. And the police did a decent and brought Fatser home so he could change into dry clothes. But the whole element of how many dockers joined the British Army, both in the First and Second World War, I found truly amazing. And then I'm going to finish up. We're going to cross over the new bridge onto the South Quays to where the Ferryman pub is now. In 1947, there was a coal boat being discharged there called the Amasa Delano. And if you were a docker working coal, it was the hardest work. It was dangerous. You inhaled coal dust. The particular shovel, the number 7 shovel, I can't lift it with no coal on it, but they could lift it with coal on it. But the handier job was if you could get a job on the crane on the ship itself. So dockers, if there were quayside cranes, a docker couldn't drive it, but if it was a gantry crane or a crane on the ship, you could. So William Deans was driving the crane that day when, because the ship hadn't been cleaned, it probably had shipped grain previously. And when they loaded with coal, it hadn't been cleaned. And gas came out of the hatch, and the captain and 2 of the crew went in and immediately collapsed. And the crew and the dockers were asked to abandon ship. And everybody did, with the exception of William Deans. So nobody knows how he knew to do this, but he urinated on his hanky and he put it over his mouth. He went into the hatch and he tied a rope around the captain. He climbed up the ladder and he dragged the 3 bodies and then carried them onto the quay wall, and they were rushed to hospital. And believe it or not, 11 years later, roughly the same spot, he saw a person throw themselves into the Liffey, and he risked his life for the 2nd time, and he saved his life. And to the best of our knowledge, he's the only Irish citizen who received 2 bravery awards from the state. So it's these kind of jewels and stories that we've spent our time, and then trying to get the people from those communities to tell them. Because William Dean's son, Cyril, passed away 10 years ago, but his memory of his father saving the 3 lives had all to do with the fact that when the 2 crew members and the captain got out of hospital some weeks later, they turned up in their house with a big hamper with sweets and biscuits and cakes. And Cyril didn't remember the saving of lives, but he certainly remembered the biscuits and sweets. So on that note...
Thank you, Declan. Thank you for that amazing kind of rich seam of stories about and from the Dublin dock workers that your group does such important work in preserving, as the title of the group suggests. And like I've asked of all of the presenters, if you could, I know you've already done it once this morning, but if you could put the relevant details of the group into the chat, that would be brilliant, where they can find you and so on. And thanks again for that amazing storytelling, which I could sit here and listen to all day, but we have to move on. And last and by no means least, we're joined by colleagues from the Epic Museum, by Shannon and Nathan, if you're both there.
Yeah, you're John.
We're here.
Great to have you, and thank you very much. And the floor is yours, as I say, last but absolutely by no means least.
Thanks, Shannon. That's fantastic. So I'm just going to speak for a couple of minutes and then hand over to Shannon. So I'm Nathan, and I'm the senior curator at the museum, and Shannon is our education manager. Declan's always a hard act to follow, but we do have a couple of slides that will run you through some of the work that we're doing at the minute, and a couple of ways maybe you'd like to get involved. There you go. Can everybody see that okay? Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah, we got that.
Thanks. That's great, Sean. Yeah, so I'd just like to start by giving a little bit of background to the museum for anyone who isn't familiar. So if you haven't been, Epic is located in the CHQ building in the Dublin Docklands. As a museum, we've been relatively successful. We're quite young. We're just approaching our 5th birthday, which sadly may be in lockdown. We were hoping to do a little bit more around it, but coming up in May, we'll be celebrating 5 years open. We're an independent museum. We're based in the CHQ building, as I said. We're dedicated to telling the story of Irish immigration. So over the last 1,500 years, 10 million people have left the island, and they've created a diaspora of over 70 million people around the world. That's the core focus of the 20 different galleries you'll find in the long-term exhibition at Epic. We scan both the historic and the present day. So excuse me, historical accounts of migration and contemporary accounts of migration as well. So some of the 330 plus stories you'll find in the exhibition, just about 70 or so are from living people who are currently living outside of Ireland, maybe return immigrants or the descendants of Irish immigrants as well. So we explore that global journey of the Irish people and the influence that diaspora has had on world affairs in a whole host of different areas, from sports to politics to different means of employment, to writing in different areas. We also have an on-site partner, the Irish Family History Centre, who are based at the back of our retail store, and they are a dedicated genealogy service. So they have a walk-in service. You can come in and research your own family trees. They also have online consultations as well, so you can come in and learn a little bit more. If under current circumstances, if you can't come on site, you can still engage online. just a little bit about where we're placed in the Docklands. So as we've seen a few very, very interesting photographs of the Docklands in days gone by. The CHQ building was formerly known as Stack A, and it's just after celebrating its 200th birthday. It was a bonded warehouse, so goods that were coming into the then Docklands were stored here until the customs fees were paid. The Stack A and the CHQ was mostly used for wine, tobacco, and tea, and some spirits as well. So the vaults underground, where Epic is actually located, were mostly for wine and spirits, and upstairs were dry goods, so tea and tobacco were stored above. And I know Declan has some great stories as well of CHQ back when it was still operating as a warehouse. But of course, the Docklands were also a very important point of departure in the 19th century for Irish emigrants who were leaving Ireland, mainly heading for Britain and for Liverpool. So we think it's a very fitting location for the museum as well, and it's important that we can continue those stories on today. But one of the projects that we're involved in, and we'd love to get kind of more participation in from people who are living in the Docklands and other areas, is called Europeana Sport. So we're working with a long-term partner of ours, the Europeana Foundation, who are the EU's digital cultural heritage body. So they're in charge of kind of bringing all of the wonderful collections that you'll find in museums, galleries, libraries, and archives all over Europe to the public. Rather than having individual kind of digitization projects on a kind of institutional basis, where a museum might digitize all of its collection that is on display or that may be in storage and put it on their own website, Europeana kind of brings that all together and creates a single repository for all of these different artifacts and objects that people might want to learn more about. And they try to limit the amount of copyright that's on those collections as well, so that they're available for reuse in schools, for community groups, for history societies, and anybody who wants to use them to engage with the kind of history and cultural heritage of Europe. And we've worked with them over a number of years on a couple of different projects. So we've been involved in the migration project, industrial heritage in Europe at Work. So they find thematic kind of focus points each year that will be broad in appeal. Anyone around Europe who may be interested in taking part. And at the minute, they are working on what's called Europeana Sport. So there are 9 lead partners all over Europe. And in Ireland, Epic is the lead on this particular project. And we are just after starting at the beginning of the year, and our goal is to find existing collections that are based around sports and sporting history, and to digitize those and make them available through the platform. But the second part is about engaging directly with the public and getting stories, sporting stories and objects from people directly and adding those to the collection. So we're doing a few different things. First off, we've done a bit of work in the background on digitizing existing collections, but now we are looking to engage with members of the public and ask them if they have anything at home. It could be photos, jerseys, medals, trophies, equipment, newspaper clippings, recordings, anything at all that for you kind of helped shape your identity or your own relationship with sports. So maybe you're an athlete, maybe you're a member of a local club, maybe you're just a diehard fan or somebody who attended a lot of different sporting events in your life, or maybe you had a family member who might have been quite prolific or is still quite involved. And what they're trying to do is kind of gather a snapshot. So collect through these objects, use them as a focal point to tell those stories. So what we're hoping to do is engage with people to bring something along. Think Antiques Roadshow, but without the valuation, to come and share any objects that you have with us. We'll digitize them, scan them, photograph them, and upload them as part of this initiative. And we'll interview everybody who's connected with the objects, get a sense of their story, and the story and the object are then uploaded to the Europeana platform. So they'll be made available online for anybody who wants to take part, to access them. And a lot of interesting collections are already kind of making their way there. Obviously, this is going on all over Europe. As you can see on the right-hand side here, it's a photo that the Dublin City Library and Archives uploaded, a lovely collection from the Jacob's Biscuit Factory. And this was a photo from, I think, 1950, from a match between the factory in Dublin and in the Aintree factory in Liverpool. And I'm glad to say Dublin won 1-0. So it's just a nice little snapshot of a bit of kind of local history. So we're encouraging people to come forward if they're a member of a club, or even if they just have some interesting stuff that they'd like to share with us. We'll be running this until the end of the year, and we'd love to hear more. And in terms of how you might get involved, so we have a few different things. COVID has changed our plans a little bit. So we were hoping to do a very big event in June, a big public collecting day where anyone can come in and share stories and material with us. That might have to move online. We'll see how that evolves. But either way, we'll still go ahead with it. We're doing one-to-one interviews in the interim, so through Zoom, just like today. If anybody wants to get in touch with a story or they have a lovely object they'd like to share photos of and they'd like to take part in the project, they can email us at, you can see here on screen, Museum and Epic, and we can arrange a one-to-one interview. If you're a member of a club, obviously, we'd love to hear more from you. And if there's other members who might want to be involved as well, or if you want to help spread the word, or maybe there's a bank of different stories that you think would be brilliant, and maybe the history of the club itself is an interesting one to share, we'd love to get that as well. If we can do the event in June, we will. If we can't, we'll move it online. But either way, we'd still really love to get a big group of people in on the day to share stories with us. And if you can't wait and you just want to get it in straight away, you can do a direct submission to Europeana by yourself at the link that you see here at the end of the screen, which I'll share after. So there's a few different ways to get involved. We're really keen that the Irish stories that are going to be included in this collection are well represented. We want to get stories from Dublin, we want to get stories from all over Ireland, and of course the Irish diaspora as well. And we want to make sure that it's quite broad as well, that we're bringing in stories from lots of different sporting traditions. We've had submissions from surfing, we've had road bowls, we've had GAA, we've had soccer, rugby, all sorts of different things coming in. It's very exciting, and we want to make sure that we get a really strong kind of Irish presence on the site and within this collection. So if you've got anything in mind, get in touch with us. I'll put the contact details in the chat just in a couple of minutes. But spread the word, take part, share, have a look in the attic. Maybe you've got some amazing stuff you want to come in and share with us as well. And yeah, that's it from me. I'm going to hand over now to Shannon, who will run you through some of our education outreach projects.
Thanks, Nathan. So there's a couple of different projects that I'm just going to highlight for you today that really tie into the Docklands and the Docks areas. But we do try across all our education outreach programming to link as closely as we can to the local area. It's a very big priority for us. So the first one I'm going to show you now. It's just disappeared off the screen. One sec. So it's engaging with the local area in terms of the tours that we do. So we've just started these tours last year, and they're actually really helmed by our visitor experience team. And they've been going out, speaking to people, collecting stories from the Docklands, similar to what Lara and Declan and other people have been doing, and really looking to help everyone soak up the rich heritage of the Dublin Docklands through these tours. So these tours explore the rich tapestries of life and movement through history, water and architecture in the Dublin Docklands. And it's our hope with them that we can tell interwoven tales that echo from the building blocks of the Customs House to some stories that were set buried or trapped in stone, and some others that are climbing, unfurling up the masts of the Jeanie Johnston to blow in the wind. So people through history have witnessed and lived through freedom and through confinement, and the Docklands tour hopes to uncover the colourful stories not only of the local people, but also the stories of the people from other nations who are connected to the port, who ruled and influenced for good and for bad. So it goes back to the very beginning. They tell us stories of how the earth beneath the feet was reclaimed from the marshy sea. The foundations were laid to build these docklands, and then there's a whole host of vivid characters as well who lived there through the centuries. So some were prisoners, others had different circumstances, were architects, builders, were dockers, artists, sculptors, kings, engineers, sailors, poets, swimmers and writers, and all brought their influence through the ages in a time of frenzy and commerce in the Docklands. For some, the Docklands was their life's blood as well. So people that we sort of feature, it's just very, very brief list because the tour is actually 2.5 hours long. So there's a lot of stories that go into it. But from James Gandon, who designed the Customs House, to John Rennie, who was the structural engineer for George's Dock in the CHQ building, then known as Stack A, and the Bindon Bloodstoney, who was the chief engineer for the Dublin Port and the Docks Board, and who also devised the diving bell. And designing and building iconic structures to shaping, deepening and widening the waterways. These people were hugely instrumental in how the Docklands look and perform today. And we think it's very important to tell their stories, whether it's to tourists, to locals, to anyone in the area. The tours also hope to capture the modern day stories. So from the period of abandonment in the Docklands to the people who are still contributing today to the look and feel of the Docklands. So for instance, how it came about that the Spanish architect Calatrava drew the plans for the Samuel Beckett Bridge and things like that. So of course, you're invited to go on these tours, but probably most importantly, they are a work in involvement. We are always looking for stories. We're always looking for things to include, much like the Docklands itself. So we would love for you all to get involved in different ways. And if there's anything that you think we should be including, we should be highlighting, we could work together. So please do contact us on groups@epicchq.com if you have anything that you think we should be looking at. So then the next slide. So just looking at as well children, so we work a lot with local schools around the area in Dublin, and we do let all the DEIS schools in Dublin into the museum for free, but we also collaborate with local schools a lot on projects and programs, because children are very uniquely positioned to access oral and material histories across multiple family generations, and they're very interested in that as well, and it's something that they cover at school. So we're always looking to work with local schools to uncover stories and to develop new workshop offerings exploring history, identity and heritage. So pictured here is, and Nathan was talking about Europeana. This was another Europeana Europe at Work collection day that took place in November 2019. And it was with 4th class pupils from an Educate Together school in Dublin. So some of the stories collected were stories of Dublin workers and their families as well during this Europe at Work project. So another project we have in development is workshops. So we worked with a couple of schools on a workshop on identity and heritage called Plot My Past, which is actually on hold now due to COVID, but it was a collaboration with the Irish Family History Centre, which began in 2020. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved there in shaping the programme, and we really want the local stories to be told. And also we continually collaborate as well with different organisations such as the Jeannie Johnston as well. This means we'll be looking to build up a programme of maritime themed workshops in the future and resources as well. So something we'll be looking to collaborate with locals on. So if there's anyone involved in a local school or a connection with a local school, you have a child going there, we honestly would love to hear from you. Please do email us again and we will put this into the chat later. And then the last sort of area that we really collaborate with people in the Docklands on is looking at basically our program. So particularly our Explorers program, which is catered to primary school, so 8 to 12 years old. And we develop a lot of workshops and resources in this program that utilize a mix of historic and factual and skills-based learning. So we feature figures from the local area. We would look at developing these programs with organizations such as Coda Dojo, the Irish Family History Centre, Jeannie Johnston, etc., like I already said. So we're always looking for more content in terms of this, to be able to collaborate with local places and really focus on those ties to the area and immigration, and to include more skills-based activities as well, such as a Mazda Marina trail and things like that. So areas of particular relevance to ports that we feature in our workshops. And just to clarify, these workshops are ongoing even during COVID. We do these online. We do them for local schools, we do them for national schools, we do them for international as well. So areas of particular relevance to ports I have here on screen: exploration, famine and pirates, things like that. So that any stories or different things like that that you might think this would be a great opportunity for us to collaborate on a workshop, or even contribute to a resource pack. For instance, we've been working with the Famine Trail, going down the canals to do resource packs with them. We're always open to that sort of collaboration. So please do email us on groups@epicchq.com. And I think I'll wrap up there, and thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you so much to Nathan and to Shannon. And as per, if you could put your contact info into the into the chat, that would be brilliant. I'm conscious of the time. We're at 12:30, and I'm aware that many of the people here will be participating in the one or more of our creative sessions in the afternoon. So you may well want to take your break from the screen and we'll be moving to that shortly. But if it's okay, I'm going to ask our presenters to hang on for just a moment in case there are any kind of questions from the audience, if that's all right. Before we do that, and while we do that, I'm going to highlight again and spotlight the work that our graphic recorder, Maya Thomas, has been doing over the course of the presentations we've heard during this roundtable on doing heritage in Dublin Port, capturing the rich diversity of projects and of organizations working in and on heritage, natural heritage, social heritage, cultural heritage in and around Dublin Port. We've heard, you know, an incredible diversity of approaches to heritage in Dublin Port, a credible diversity of organizations that are capturing and promoting that heritage. And Ports Past and Present really exists in and relies on this really rich culture of engagement with heritage, social heritage, built heritage, natural heritage in Dublin Port. And we were really keen this morning to showcase all of this fantastic work in all of its diversity. And we're really grateful again, and I want to record my thanks and my thanks on behalf of Ports Past and Present to all of our colleagues from across these projects and organizations for joining us this morning, and for their support for the Ports Past and Present project more broadly. You're all a key part of the kind of heritage and tourism network that we as a project are seeking to build, and our project very much relies on the work that you do, and it's been great to have you here this morning. And I hope that Maya has captured some of that rich diversity. I want to flag again that we do have a feedback form for Ports Fest. Aoife has put the link into the chat. We would be very grateful. It would be genuinely very helpful to the project, not least as we are in the process of planning and in the final stages of planning in some instances, a number of Port Fests in our other port community, the other port communities that Ports Past and Present is working in and with. Rosslare is up next, and that will be taking place between the 21st and the 23rd of April. So do watch this space. And any feedback you have on today's event will be very, very helpful in informing and shaping that and the other forthcoming Port Fests in our Welsh port communities as well. So having said all of that, and having given you your get out clause and said you're very welcome to log out now and take that screen break should you wish to do so, are there any questions for any of the presenters that we have heard from over the course of this roundtable on doing heritage in Dublin Port, and or for any members of the Ports Past and Present team as well? Again, if you want to ask a question, you can use the raise hand function, or you're very welcome to put it into the chat. If there aren't any questions forthcoming now, and one occurs to you, or you'd like to get in touch with either the Ports Past and Present project or with one of the other groups or organizations you've heard from this morning, then do by all means drop Ports Past and Present a line via our social media platforms or by the project email. We'll be very glad to receive any questions and or to field them to pass them on to any of the other organizations that have presented this morning. But I think looking at the chat, there aren't any questions there. I don't see any hands raised. So I just want to thank again our presenters over the course of this roundtable. And we can field any further questions to those groups So thanks very much. Those of you that are participating in one of our creative projects, you will already have the link to that and the times for that. They're also available on the Eventbrite page for today. But we look forward to seeing those of you that will be participating in those later on this afternoon. And the first one kicks off at 1:15. So we'll take a quick break now for lunch, I think. And thanks all again, and look forward to seeing some of you, if not all of you, later on this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Brilliant presentations.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care all and stay safe, and do stay in touch with the project if you're and hope to see many of you later on this afternoon.